I'm starting 0.4 with a limit stacking Stormweaver, using Orb of Storms as my base battery and Firestorm as the primary output while using a bunch of trigger skills in the mix during the middle. Now this build guide will definitely change as new gem information comes out from the new Druid stuff and as the skill tree actually gets released. However, the core concept is concrete and it was actually inspired from this guy who did this build, something similar at least, but sadly for him, Firestorm at the time was bugged to suck really bad. Now, there are 5 main reasons why this build is going to be extremely strong as a starter for this patch. Firstly, Firestorm is getting bug fixed to have that fire infused benefit of having extra damage applied to all parts of the elemental storm, not just the fire part. Secondly, Firestorm itself is getting roughly a double damage buff just to its base damage. Now it is having less hit frequency, but that actually doesn't matter since Firestorm has a max hit rate limit that you pretty much always reach on any single target encounter anyways. Thirdly, Ball Lightning received similar base damage buffs, roughly doubling its damage as well, so it's a great skill now to be playing. Fourthly, and perhaps the biggest, Stormweaver got a whole set of buffs that are super underrated. Firstly, that +2 limit is really big from +1 limit. This means I no longer need to run Idol of Uldren and I can actually spam Orb of Storms and actually get Lightning Infusion from that. Now you might think, well, don't you need +1 limit since Orb of Storms needs to hit 6 times? Well, no, because at 5 limit for Orb of Storms, you're getting 5 Orb of Storms out, and as you're casting, it's constantly triggering Orb of Storms. But there's also a base cast time that's also going to be kind of applying to that 6 beams, and then it will be consumed, and then Lightning Infusions will then spawn. The buff to multiplying squalls will also help out with Firestorm as a single target, and for also Living Bomb, which I do plan to use. Refracted Infusion was also buffed, now doubling its generation for other infusions after you generate 1 infusion. So say I cast Orb of Storms, consume that Orb of Storms by, casting a bunch of other times, it will not only spawn 1 Lightning Infusion, it will also be guaranteed to spawn 1 Cold or Fire Infusion. Really great for Firestorm. Lastly, Storm's Recollection, if I do choose to take this node, also has extra pickup radius, and I think QOL and just getting enough pickup radius in general on the tree is going to make this feel much better to play. The 5th buff that this skill received was with Mana Tempest, and I'm not even sure I'm going to be using Mana Tempest often. However, Mana Tempest now has its benefits linger for 2 seconds after you leave the area. This is going to be really nice to supplement your early clear, and I plan to basically play this, especially in the early game, by casting Orb of Storms 2-3 times, then casting Mana Tempest, then walking away. So that should be really helpful. Additionally, this build also has one of the easiest progression paths for Sorceress. Now, back in the 0.3 races, we saw a lot of people combine Orb of Storms and Ember Fusillade as the primary skills for, killing a lot of early bosses, having a ton of extra damage. This build has very limited deviation from that as far as the skill tree goes, the support gems, and the main skill gems themselves actually, which is really, really great for early transitioning into your league starter build. Everything else about this build can be found on the Mobilix page, which I will go over right now. This is probably where I'm going to keep things as up to date as I can. There are POBs here and there, but let's go over everything right now. So I'll go through an order of what Mobile page actually says. I'm choosing not to really go for the POB as the overview this time because we don't even have the final tree. However, over here, let's talk about this first. So the playstyle is basically you just walk up to a pack, press Orb of Storms, however many times you need to kill the pack. It should be even better this patch because you will have things chaining between less monsters and having pretty good single target on those monsters. I've really not spec'd out any unique gear other than Ingenuity for now. There are a bunch of uniques that I think could be extremely potent, but I'm gonna kind of set this up to be SSF because we really don't know about the availability and rarity of relative uniques you'd want to play. So all the gear is kind of based around that. A Dueling Wand is something I really want to be playing because it does give you Spell Slinger. Otherwise, I'm looking for things like a Spirit and Malice Scepter, Spirit, ES, Mana, that sort of thing everywhere, and resistances and movement speed. I don't really play additional movement options. I don't play Blink, so pretty much I'm just going to be running around and casting. Hopefully it'll be good enough. I might look for a Source of Explode later on. Alright. Sorry, I'm still sick right now. Let's talk about the skill gems. Inside of my Spell Slinger, which I will be triggering, I'm planning to put Arc right now. The reason I put Arc is that Arc is one of the best clearing skills with the Lightning Infusions, and it's not like super crazy for a single target, but I feel like while mapping, with how often I want to be casting Orb of Storms, the consistency of Spell Slinger and Arc should feel pretty good, all things considered. Elemental Storm will be taken because it's the path leading into the +1 limit. My Elemental Storm, for a lot of other people, they play for utility. So early on, I'd play like Blind on here, and I'd be playing Blindside in a bunch of different places. But kind of prepping for later game, I'm just running a bunch of damage base supports, and that's going to be my Elemental Storm. It's also really great for supplementing early clear. I just think the skill in general is underrated. Orb of Storms, my main setup here, is running Overabundance. This gives me the +5 limit, plus with the Ascendancy and the node on the tree. I got Rising Tempest, which is really easy to proc because I'm tri-elemental. Mobility is like, once you have enough damage, this is really great to have. Pinpoint Crit for better Elemental Storm proc rate and for better cast on crit proc rate. And then Rapid Casting should feel decent, especially if you say you're casting Orb of Storms, casting Mana Tempest from time to time, and then also probably casting Firestorm sometimes. I mean, the rest of the gems are like kind of self-explanatory, but I do want to talk about one thing. So I would play Xerox later for Firestorm. Early on, I'm gonna play Unleash. There is one more thing that might be interesting. Firestorm might work with the new Advancing Storm, I think that's what it's called, support, which makes your storms move. I'm not sure if it's gonna work with Firestorm, but if it does, I would consider putting Firestorm in actually one of the trigger setups and having hopefully Firestorms follow me around. That'd be super sick if that works that way. But yeah. Mana Tempest is down here. Trinity can be maintained very easily because I have tri-elemental damage from my Firestorm. And I also have like mixed damage from things like Living Bomb, Arc, Orb of Storms, and Frostbomb itself. So I chose to put Living Bomb in my Cast and Crit setup for now. I think this should be the most consistent generation on bosses. I'm not entirely sure, but that's my hunch at least. Living Bomb is probably the skill I want to be using the most or generating the most of because it doesn't consume infusions, it generates them instead. Inside my Elemental Invocation, and this is what I'm going to be using for my Numlock setup. If you don't know what a Numlock trick is for binding in PoE, look it up on Google. But basically, Bolt Lightning should be really strong over here. I needed something to spend my Fire Infusions in excess, since I'm probably going to get so many, right? Frostbomb is really crazy for exposure. Something a lot of people don't know, I guess, is that this node over here, Strip Defenses, every single pulse for Frostbomb applies this. So like, say your Frostbomb applies base 20. On the pulse, it will push that to 27. And the next pulse will push that to 34. So this node with Frostbomb and Long Fuse is like insane. I think this is better than your Curse setup, but I'm going to play Curse setup as well. Now for the tree, there's a few things I can do. This setup is assuming a controlled metamorphosis, but you can just path the nodes over here that are important, like, +1 limit. And maybe going for a crown, but so this is the top side focus tree. It is the lowest EHP tree I could probably run, but it's the best max hit tree that I can run. It's the most consistent feeling. Now, there's also the option, perhaps, of dropping a lot of this stuff over here and pathing towards Monkstar instead, where you would maybe still have some movement speed to grab, have hybrid modes, and then also probably change your anoint to Subterfuge Mask, if that still exists. But again, we don't really know the tree, so that's another option. It would probably give you better evasion. I might even consider running a hybrid chest at that point. But yeah. The leveling trees themselves are pretty similar to this. It can be found inside this POB. But let's talk about leveling real quick. So you start out by playing Spark Unleash. You get Spark naturally when you run through to the Miller, and then you get Frostbomb and Contagion from your 2 gems. One from the quests after you do Miller, and then one from the encampment. At level 6, once I kill Rust King, the first gem I really want to get is Essence Drain. I think Essence Drain Contagion is OP as hell for early casters. You can play this setup even, through to level 40, and during the races people did. You want to get Orb of Storms when you can. It's just like pretty good for single target. I think in general Orb of Storms is one of the most underrated skills. It just does so much damage. So at level 14 is when you can make your first really cool swap. Let's talk about this. So level 14 enables tier 5 gems, and this is Ember Fuselet, right? Crazy skill, really synergistic with Orb of Storms, Lightning Infusions. However, at this point, I can also maybe play Orb of Storms for clearing. If you link it with Living Lightning, which I think is what Garotha was doing, it actually makes a pretty solid clearing skill for a lot of the early game. Now, you don't really have great minion scaling for later, but early on, just casting Orb of Storms a few times, or maybe unleashing it, casting Ember Fuselet, feels really good for clear. The utility steps are incredibly potent at this point, because you're playing elemental damage. So Frostbomb is like, gonna roughly double your damage actually, and Elemental Weakness will give you another 50% more damage, I think, on average. Mana Tempest in this rotation, if you're playing on bosses, you basically press Orb of Storms linked with these things. Let's say you have the 3 link. Cast Ember Fuselet 8 times, or 7 times, however many it is. Then press Mana Tempest as your Ember Fuselet is about to leave, and then let go. You could also consider playing the reduced duration support here instead of consider casting. I think that's probably a good idea, fast forward or whatever it's called. I don't really know what it's called anymore. And then at level 41 is when you can transition into the core build, and this is when I start to go for that Orb of Storms, Firestorm setup. I entirely drop Ember Fuselet. Even though it's still pretty good at damage, I like to have that more consistent playstyle of just pressing Orb of Storms, Mana Tempest, and then Firestorm for single target. You should also have Elemental Invocation at this point, giving you Living Bomb and Fire Infusion generation on bosses. You will need to either manually cast Elemental Invocation to trigger that Living Bomb on bosses, or you can, numlock it. But numlock is kind of annoying, especially during the campaign when you're talking to vendors a lot and talking to different quest NPCs, but yeah. So yeah, that's the kind of League Start plan I have so far. I'll update it with a few uniques and like different things as I get into like day 2 and stuff, but I'm probably going to be playing fairly lightly I don't even know if I'm gonna get 12 hours of gameplay in on day one, because I am feeling like pretty rough right now physically. But if you're starting with this, I think it's a really safe build to start with. It's not as fast as some of the other things you could do, but it does have great single target damage all the way through the game, great transitions, and I think it should be really smooth to play all the way through.